Welcome to the Endurance Drive podcast.
Our mission is to share the key principles that structure our approach to endurance training and coaching.
I'm Jim.
And I'm Katie.
Hey, Katie, guess what?
What?
It's race season.
Thank you, Jim, for the reminder that it's race season. I'm trying to forget that the race season has begun, given last weekend, but it is race season.
Right. So I just took a little peek at your coaching and training insights, and wow, you've got a lot to say. You did a sprint triathlon, and boy, lots of lessons. And so I thought, maybe should we just kick it off with your stuff? Because I think you have a lot to say today.
I have a lot to say about the Cohasset Triathlon. And actually, to zoom out on deeper reflection, it was not actually that bad. It was totally a fine race day. But I think now that we have this spotlight on the podcast, I feel like the whole time wasn't having a good time, was thinking about lessons, was having a good time, was thinking about lessons, was frustrated with logistics, thinking about lessons. And honestly, usually I'm trying to give people mantras that are really widely applicable, but a personal mantra that maybe is only going to work for me and for you and for Elena is, if you're having a bad time, just say, remember the podcast, think of the lessons. So that definitely got me through some dark moments in the hour and a bit that it took to do the Cohasset Sprint Triathlon.
It's amazing how painful just a sprint can be, isn't it?
I know. Yeah. And especially when you're not training for a sprint, you're not used to doing like balls to the wall for an hour. And we preach this zone 2 thing so much that it's really a shock to the system to be, sitting above threshold for that long. It definitely hurts a little.
Yeah. Well, as we always say, racing is a rich learning environment. So I think that's a way of saying, tell us all about your Cohasset Tri, which is like, it seems like it's bigger than like Kona even, like it is. Okay, first question is Cohasset Tri bigger than Kona?
Emotionally, maybe. Physically, it is definitely not. But actually, okay, so fun fact about the Cohasset Tri, I learned this weekend that it is the biggest triathlon in New England. So definitely a bigger tri than I thought. They have well over 1,000 folks going, and it's a race that I've done several years, I guess probably 3 or 4 times by now. My family lives down there, and so I spend a lot of time training in that area, and I do race it as mostly a family event. But I raced it this weekend again, as I've said, and definitely picked up some interesting things that I think will hopefully be applicable to our broader audience, not just me, like telling you the intricacies of my time at the Cohasset Tri. So the first thing I want to talk about is, Jim, something that you've always told me that we riff on all the time is when making decisions, the question of if it's not a hell yes, it's a no. And I was having this conversation with myself the whole week leading up to the race where it was not a hell yes for me to do the Cohasset Triathlon for a variety of reasons. Number one, I had come off a ton of crazy travel. I was exhausted, high LSS week. Number two, logistically not that great in prepping for a really, really long race. Again, there's so many skills to be gained from racing, but I was like, this is naturally going to be a lower TSS week for me. I'd love to kind of stack some big trail runs and big bike volume, which just wasn't going to happen with a sprint tri. And then third, I was wearing many, many hats at this triathlon. So I was coaching. I had several private athletes coaching, as well as the Dartmouth team was down there. I had a bunch of my family members were actually racing, including doing their first triathlon ever. So there's always going to be questions with that. We hosted a big party after this triathlon. I was kind of in charge of a lot of things with that. And it just led to me having a lot of stress going to this race. And then finally, I also haven't really trained for a sprint tri. So the whole week I was like, it's not really a hell yes for me to do this race. And I think maybe race week is one exception to this rule. If it's not a hell yes, it's a no. Just because everyone's going to be so nervous and anxious going into their races that you're certainly going to have some self-talk that's like, maybe I just shouldn't even do this. Maybe I should just focus on the coaching piece or focus on something else. And I think that for me, thinking about choosing whether to do a race or not, like there is your moment for, is it a hell yes or it's a no? 6 months out from your Ironman, it's like, am I really hell yes? Am I all in on this? If you're not all in at that point, you're not going to be all in the week of the race. But during that race week, I think it's maybe more productive to think more about like, okay, curious mindset. I'm here to learn. This is a good opportunity to dip my toe in racing before my A race and practice some mental strategies. And of course, there are extenuating circumstances where if you're injured or you're sick, then it's definitely a hell no to race. But for me, I think I couldn't draw on that usual mantra because then I would have just walked myself right out of this race. And even though it wasn't my favorite race ever, I still am glad that I did it because of the podcasting lessons. So sometimes if it's not a hell yes, it's still okay to say yes.
It's all content, right? So, but anyway, well, first of all, A+ for doing all those things. I mean, we're managing a lot of different roles, as we all know you generally do. So I'm sure you did them all really well. So congratulations. And I'm glad you did race because now we have lots of content. But yeah, personally, I find it super hard to And one thing I've sort of stepped back from racing in the last number of years because I realized I just couldn't coach and really race at the same time. I just feel like it's just too hard for me just to mentally separate those two out because I feel like you're all in on coaching or you're all in on racing. And for me, it's hard to go into a race and casually just do it and be like, oh, I'm just going to do it for fun. I don't care about the results. It's like, of course I care about the results. I'm super competitive, but personally trying to get better at that. But I'm super glad that you raced and what else you got? What was the race like? Was it challenging? I heard the conditions were a bit dicey down there.
Yeah, well, I think this brings me to 3 insights, one for swim, one for bike, and one for run that really came out of the conditions of this race specifically. So it's not a crazy difficult race. Again, it's a sprint triathlon, but I would say that this swim was one of the more chaotic swims that I've actually been in. The only one that I think compares to how chaotic this was the first 1,000 or so of the Ironman World Championship swim this past October was pretty crazy. And what I mean by crazy is they started so many athletes at the same time that it was just a total mosh pit trying to get to that first buoy. And I found that I was getting kicked and thrashed around and swallowing water way more than I usually do. And in general, those mass starts at big races can be really hard to simulate and practice. My father-in-law, who was doing his first triathlon ever, he'd done a lot of practice swimming, but he hadn't practiced running into the water with 100 people in his wave and getting hit over the head over and over again. And that's something that's really, really hard to do. And thinking to how to really get used to this, I think one of the things we've at least done with the Dartmouth Triathlon team is sometimes we'll put 12 kids in a single lane line and we'll say, hey, everyone swim a fast 25. But unless you're with a master swim group that's all down to do that, it's so hard to simulate that type of thing. So I think here, just think a lot about having a mantra, just keep moving forward, be okay with changing your stroke around. It's not going to be a perfect stroke, but trying to just be sighting and looking at that buoy, I think is really, really important. And again, getting in the water beforehand, so at least the panic of the cold gets taken away. There's probably 8 different factors that are going to lead to potential panicking here. But yeah, it was so chaotic that it was really just a survival swim more than anything else for me.
Yeah, the other thing we tell people too is if you are a new swimmer, beginner swimmer, and you're not comfortable, just give everybody 10 seconds and just go. And obviously for you, it's not the case because you're competitive and you're going to be up there, so you have to kind of go. But if you are uncomfortable, you can just, the gun can go off and you let 100 people go and then you wait 5 seconds and then you go and say, okay, here we go.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think for a race like this, I would definitely recommend it. And the good news is actually for many 70.3s and Ironmans, they've actually moved to send 3 people off at a time, send 8 people off at a time, those different kind of gated starts. So you might see that in your races, but just be prepared. It's good to actually look up what kind of swim start it's going to be. And for this race in particular, huge race. And I think there were probably over 100 people in my wave starting at the same time. Mm-hmm. So next insight for me, going to talk about the bike now. This bike course is not too bad. It's 12 miles. It's a little punchy, but the biggest challenging factor of this bike was it started raining hard in the middle of the bike, and it had been kind of misting before then. So the roads were really, really wet and slick. And the course does have a fair number of sharp turns, as well as some sections with pretty bad pavement. And then the final thing that was challenging was they sent off 2 novice waves before my wave, as well as I think 1 other regular wave. And so there were many instances where I saw 4 people across, all on mountain bikes going 14 miles an hour in front of me. And I'm on my TT bike trying to go a little bit faster than that, screaming on your left, but people aren't even totally familiar with the rules of the road. So I think at a certain point, I kind of just had to surrender to the conditions of the bike course. And you just have to tell yourself, you know what, I'm going to do the best that I can here. But I also don't want to be in a bike crash. That's not what we're trying to do. So I think I biked a little bit more conservatively than maybe my fitness would have allowed me to, because again, it was so wet. And I was like, of all things, I am not going to compromise my season with a crash at the Cohasset Tri if I can avoid it. And then another thing too was in that type of rain, even visibility can be an issue. So I ended up not actually being able to see through my glasses. They got really, really fogged up. I had to sit up, put them in my kit. I would maybe have considered not even taking the glasses if I knew that it was going to be like that. But you also don't want water splashing in their eyes. And then, finally, just a ton of caution, especially on those sharp turns and bad pavement. Something I'll talk about later is that my husband was racing a relay. He was actually in a bike crash during this race, which added to some of the stress of the day. But it's just not worth it for a sprint triathlon. You have to make safety your number one priority in these extra challenging conditions.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to what we said, never don't do anything today that would jeopardize tomorrow. So, and you're not allowed to crash because that's my job.
Yeah. And this is also this is true even for A races, I would say. Ironman Mont Tremblant 70.3, that was this past weekend. And they had really scary, awful torrential downpours. And the bike times were pretty slow relative to what I think a lot of people are capable of there. But even if it's your A race, it's not worth putting yourself in a risky situation.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So my last insight from the conditions, got onto the run. At least there was no one like hitting me necessarily and no crashes and everything. But I noticed the humidity can be really tough, even if it's not that hot. So it was interesting conditions here. I think I woke up and I was like, oh, great. We've been in a heat wave. It's like 68 degrees, nothing to worry about. But it was also about 100% humidity for this entire race. And I just had this feeling of like, there is a wet blanket on me for the whole run. And I was kind of struggling with that, even though I wasn't even aware of being particularly warm. So I think just be aware. You want to follow a cooling strategy, even if you're already soaking wet and it doesn't seem that hot out, if the humidity is high. I ended up skipping the first aid station of grabbing like water to dump on myself because I was like, this is a 3-mile run. It doesn't matter. It's on the opposite side of the road. But I think I probably should have done that because I did end up getting pretty hot by the end of the run.
No, yeah, I mean, your big mistake here is you didn't use the Jim Anderson heat index.
I know. It would have been 68 plus 100. That's crazy.
I know. That's a lot. Like anything over 140 gets challenging and it's an exponential curve. So you were at 160s plus. That's super challenging.
All right. Good to know. Noted that I made some mistakes at this race.
Well, it's my fault because I haven't put the app out yet. That's the problem, So
it's definitely, yeah. If you haven't heard of it, one of our episodes, we talk about the Jim Anderson heat index, but it's not a real heat index, but it does seem to apparently matter. So keep that in mind. Okay, so anyway, I've been talking a lot about how I wasn't super happy about this race. At the end of the day, it actually went fine. I think my biggest take home for me was that I just felt like my legs didn't really show up on the run the way that I expected them to. And I felt like I just didn't have that turnover that I knew I had the fitness for. But a big take home for me, kind of reflecting after that, was to really try and keep perspective. So I was basing that assessment on seeing my watch as I was running along. But then I actually looked down at my times and compared them to last year and realized that I had improved in the swim, T1, the bike, T2, and the run for like 90 seconds faster of an overall time, which in a sprint is actually pretty good. And last year I had crossed the finish line being like, I had such a great day. This was awesome. So it just goes to show you can feel really different based on the data points that you focus on and the metrics that you highlight. And as someone who's extraordinarily self-critical and big time on the negativity bias train, I do have to work pretty hard to focus on the positives. So I want to share 3 strategies for doing that I've worked on in the last day or two. Number 1, it's good to journal post-race a little bit and just try to write down as many pros as you have cons. Or if there's a con, you can try to reframe it. So if you're like, my bike wasn't as fast as I wanted, but I didn't crash and I think my bike handling was pretty good given those tough conditions, for example. A second one is I try to ask myself what I would say to one of my athletes if they were saying all of this. Because I'd never be like, wow, you really kind of suck. Like, that was a really shitty race. I don't think I would say something like that. So you probably shouldn't be saying it to yourself. And then if you're having a tough time with that, it's also helpful to lean on others who can help you see those positives. So I got a lot of really nice support from other people, and that was helpful. Sometimes you just need to outsource some of the positive self-talk if you can't do it to yourself. So that was pretty helpful for me.
Yeah, no, I love that. I'm like same thing when I get down and I say to myself, okay, what would I say to somebody who's having this same type of day? And of course, it's always much more upbeat and positive and kind. And yeah, like I said, I think a lot of us have this negativity bias, and we're just super competitive, and we have such a high standard that we're trying to hit. And sometimes that high standard maybe isn't reasonable, or just it's like not happening on that day. But for you, then again, it did seem to happen because you were 90 seconds faster this year. So that's super cool.
Though, a funny insight about being faster this year, and I don't want to focus too much on my own specific performance, but I was actually mostly faster because I had a lot faster transitions. I was looking at sort of the breakdown, and I picked up like 5 seconds on the swim and 10 seconds on the bike and 8 seconds on the run or something. And I took like over a minute off my transition times. And I actually won a free subscription to Whoop for like some fastest transition award situation, which is kind of funny because I haven't really practiced my transitions very much and it's not relevant that much to my A race. But I did not wear socks and I did get lock laces. So that is a quick plug for ways to save a lot of time or to not worry about socks in a sprint. And now I guess I'm going to have a Whoop and an Oura Ring and a Garmin. So lucky me on the big data.
You're going to have a quantified life for sure. So did you do the flying mount?
So I did not do the flying mount or the flying dismount. Yeah, it was so wet that I was just not super, super confident in it. And then the other challenge of this course is that moving into T2 is a steep downhill. So you're not really in a position where you're going to be reaching down there. And honestly, I don't think I lost any time. I didn't see any, at least none of the women around me who are all kind of at the top were doing the flying dismount. So you can still have a fast transition even without it.
Yeah, I think it's funny. The flying mount becomes this thing that people talk about all the time. And one of my beginner triathletes asked me the other day, no, I didn't do the flying mount, but is that okay? I'm like, dude, I've never done a flying mount before, ever. The flying mount, sure. I think it's easier and safer to work on, especially for Brisbane's and Olympics. But yeah, the flying mount, I don't know. I've never been a big fan anyway.
Yeah. Well, I think I am going to stick to just doing it in the driveway, slowly and in a way that's really controlled, but probably will not be bringing it to Sea to Summit because it's just not going to matter.
You're going to mostly save it for cyclocross, right? Yeah.
Yeah. That's my next sporting career.
Yeah.
One or two more insights. So the first one, I did want to talk a little bit about not underestimating the TSS and LSS combo of a day like the day that I had on Sunday. So I think on further reflection, the reason that this day was kind of tough was because you do a sprint tri. That's hard. I alluded to before my husband had a bike crash. That was pretty scary. I was kind of in transition waiting for him to come through for his relay. He didn't come for a long time. Eventually, we're getting him all bandaged up, road rash, all of that. I was then kind of the logistics captain of a big party. I don't know if this is relevant to the podcast or not, but I accidentally clipped my aunt-in-law's car on a stone wall in our driveway and really dented it big time when I was shuttling people back and forth. This was a lot of things that happened all in one day. And I think the take home was like the next day I was wiped, like so tired, even though my body didn't even really hurt that much and my resting heart rate was up. And I think all of my stress metrics were just totally freaked out. And I think, it was a comparatively short training day for me. I did, an hour of physical activity, maybe 100 TSS, and many days we're doing 200 TSS or 250, 300, and it doesn't feel the same. But I think when you have a day like that, it doesn't have to be because all these things happen. It can just be any type of high LSS, especially in combination with threshold heart rate. You need to give yourself a little bit more time to bounce back. So I'm going to keep my training nice and easy. The next couple of days, I've been trying to do that. And I'm still not feeling 100%, but I'm confident that within a couple of days, I'll be there.
Yeah, awesome.
And then last couple of insights. This goes back to our last lessons episode where we talked about podcasting insights. But I would say my favorite moment of the entire day was having a podcast listener who I haven't met before, but hopefully who will be coaching in 2025, came up and said, I love your coaches and your podcast. Are you coached by Katie? And then I said, I am Katie. And we had a great conversation. So shout out to Dean. It was so great to meet you. And it was amazing that you told me that you listened to this podcast on your drive to work every Thursday. So thanks so much. This is truly like living the dream of the podcast. And it was really, really fun for me.
That's so cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
You had it happen before in other places too as well, right?
Yeah, it's really starting to happen. So I don't know who all these people are, but we're glad that they're listening. And if you see us in the wild, please come say hi because it really makes us feel awesome when we get spotted in the wild as podcasters. All right, Jim, I think that's it for me. That was a lot on the Cohasset Tri. The take home is that I'm fine with who went and I'm working on not being so critical. But yeah, congrats to all of our athletes who raced that. We saw a ton of really fun performances. Dartmouth Tri folks, a couple of our athletes absolutely smashed it. So it was really fun to see that. And yeah, I'm glad that I did another race before jumping into my A race because now at least I know how tough race week can be and I've got some strategies for dealing with it.
Nice job. All right. Well, so for my coaching insights, I've got a few here. The first one is that I've had a number of conversations with athletes in the last week or so who are doing this, I call it a mid-season evaluation. So a bunch of people have raced now. I've had a bunch of athletes who have done their, some sprints, some Olympics, and a number of people who have now finished their half Ironman. And some of them jumped back in and said, yeah, I want to keep going in the structured thing and I have more goals and I want to stay fit. I don't want to lose this fitness. And then about 2 weeks later, they're like, actually, I kind of want to take the rest of the summer off. And then I've had other athletes who are planning to do Ironmans, Ironman just long distance, and saying, hey, what? I've just thought about it. It's too much. I'm going to step back to a half Ironman, which is much more manageable. So I guess I just want to say, this is a great time of year to say, okay, if you have a race and say, what do I want the rest of my summer to look like? We've got, July, August for the summer. Summer goes by very quickly. So a great time to ask those questions, like, what do I want from the rest of my summer? And, we always just encourage this, being thoughtful about your training, being thoughtful about your racing. And as coaches, we encourage you guys to go off and have fun and do unstructured work for the rest of the summer if you want to, and just keep it fresh, keep it sustainable. And one of these same athletes said, I'm going to go and do unstructured training. How do I keep it fun? And I said, well, the first thing you need to do is that you've just done it, which is you've just evaluated and said, I want to have fun the rest of the summer. I'm like, that's the perfect way to stay in shape. And in fact, that athlete, or remember these athletes are probably going to stay in just as good a shape as they were if they were doing structured, but they're just now the pressure is just off.
I love that. Yeah. And I think 2 points. Number one, I think athletes sometimes feel bad because they're like, oh, well, I don't want to let Jim or Katie down because I'm working with them. But we love it. And we know that there will be a time and a place for you to come back, whether it's in the spring of next year or it's in the winter, it's in the fall. We are always here for you. But I think I actually don't love to coach people for 365 days of a year because I think that's the path to burnout. And the second point, which is related, is that taking a break from, structured training doesn't actually have to mean taking a break from fitness. I find that I like to do about 6 months in a year of structured training and 6 months of unstructured. And maybe, my specific race fitness on the TT bike to go for 6 hours kind of comes off a little bit, but I might be building other things during that time. And it really is the mental break almost even more than the physical break. So just keep in mind that the alternative is not sit on the couch for your entire rest of the year. You can do that if you want to, but it's not like that's the only thing you can do. You can go out and have fun and go hiking and play pickleball and do random things, and you'll be totally fine for when you want to jump back in.
That's awesome. Pickleball. We got to make a workout for that in Training Peaks.
Yeah. Well, Oura Ring can detect it automatically, so it's pretty good.
What about the Whoop? Now that you've got that as well, too. So.
I'll let you know when I quality test them both and wear all 3 devices at once.
That'll be another gear pick of the week. So my second one here is sort of these active recovery principles. So a lot of you know I've been coming back from a leg injury. I broke my femur in 2 places. So I've been doing a lot of sort of active recovery, sort of zone 1, zone 0 workouts. And I think just want to share 2 principles that I often use for active recovery. And that the first one is that I must feel better after the workout than before the workout. So I should get to finish the workout and say, oh, I feel refreshed and rejuvenated, as opposed to like, oh, I was trying to chase some fitness. And so it was leads to my second one, which is like sometimes I'm out there and I'm doing active recovery. And, again, we're all sort of competitive and we're always trying to chase a little bit of fitness and sneak a little bit more in. I sort of fall back onto what my attorneys used to say to me when I was debating whether to do something or not. He'd always say to me, Jim, can you stand in front of a judge straight faced and say you did that with honest intention? And so that's always a great principle. So sometimes when I'm out on my active recovery and I start to crank it up a little bit, and all of a sudden I realize, oh, wait, can I stand in front of a judge at the end of this session and say, yes, Your Honor, this was an active recovery workout. So I just use those two to guide my active recovery.
I love that second one, especially. And I think if you're someone who knows that you can't really trust yourself to hold back and keep it zone 0 or zone 1, it's better to maybe just take the recovery day than do active recovery because it has to fulfill that intention. Like for me, I think it took a lot of swim training, for example, to get to the point where I could stand in front of a judge and say that my Monday tech swim is actually a recovery swim and not like a threshold flail. So again, if you're someone who's not so sure if you can hold back, err on the side of more recovery and just take the day off.
We need Judge Judy. And my third one here is that it's a dual-sided power meter. So generally people ask me, oh, should I get a power meter? And I'm always like, yes, of course you should get a power meter, but just get a one-sided power meter because generally most of the time that works fine. But what I'm finding is, again, coming back from this leg injury, is that it's been super useful to have like left and right power. And so hopefully most of you folks listening aren't going to be in the position to have to need a dual-side power. But if you do have a big injury or something, I'm just finding a lot of value in setting up on my Garmin. I can see in real time, like, okay, I'm using 45% of my left and 55% of my right, and just started to work on a pedal stroke to actually try to even those things out, or just to see where I'm at based upon the strength of where my leg is right now. So I'm just doing a lot of like one-legged pedal drills, even though I have 2 legs in, and then I'm playing around with my pedal stroke, and I'm just learning that I think I have a pretty good natural pedal stroke, but coming back from this injury, I'm having to kind of relearn like, oh, get my heel down and bring my knee in a little bit here. And so it's been really interesting. I'm kind of hoping that this is one of those classic cases where coming back from injury, my pedal stroke will be better after I've had an injury. But I'm just always surprised. Like I look down and I go, oh, I'm pedaling great here. And I look down, I'm like, no, I'm not pedaling great here at all. And then I'll have to really kind of work on evening those things out. And then the other thing I've kind of noticed is that when I try hard to make them even, like it doesn't really work. And so I always say to myself, like, relax, relax, relax. And then so if I just think smooth, I often don't get the job done. But if I think sort of relaxed and smooth, like suddenly the power will come back into balance. So I'm really finding this value in just like having a very relaxed pedal stroke. And relaxed seems to be smooth and smooth seems to be balanced.
I like that. And I think I'd love to add to this, if you're not sure if you have a lot of imbalances, that's actually something a PT can check out. So have your local professional network. And if you're not sure, if you don't want to invest maybe in the dual-sided power meter right away and you're not injured, for example, you can go to a PT and you can say like, hey, can you check my leg strength on right versus left? And if you have one really overpowered leg, then you should be aware of that. And that's another reason to really need to smooth out the pedal stroke, because it could be forecasting some type of injury down the line. So again, like, you don't necessarily need to bite the financial bullet on dual-sided power meter right this second. But if you go to a PT, maybe you can get that covered by insurance, get your legs checked out, and then see if it's worth it.
Yeah, and I think this is a good plug for having just a big network of triathletes and cyclists, because if you ever need a dual-sided, like, just ask around your friends, and probably somebody's dual-sided. Like, I have the Garmin Vector pedals in there, but left and right, and so that's just working perfectly. But again, I think probably in 95% or more of the cases, like, a one-sided is fine. And I'm still going to stick with just get a one-sided power meter, because usually it works great. So my last one here is one thing I see a lot with when I don't swim, or I see a lot with beginner swimmers, that there's just a lot of tension in the recovery arm. So as you exit the water out the back and you bring your arm over, there's just like a lot of tension in the shoulder and the tricep and the forearm and the hand. So there's a lot of tension as they come out of the water and they reach into the water, and it's still really tense. And then they bring their hands down towards putting their fingertips at the bottom of the pool, and they start to push really hard. And so what I've done a lot with the Dartmouth kids, teaching them a lot, there's sort of these two tensions that you want to have in your hands. And one I call warm, soft kitty, and another one I call big dog. So warm, soft kitty is the tension you would have in your hand and in your forearms if you're petting a nice little kitten. So as you come out the backside of your stroke and you start to recover, that's when you want to have this nice, warm, soft kitty. Like, you don't really want to have any kind of tension at all in your hand or your forearm. It's really floppy. And that sort of just a few milliseconds of recovery will actually allow your muscles to get ready for the pull. So come out of the water, reach over. When you enter the water, it's still a nice kitty, warm kitty. It's very relaxed. And then when you get your fingertips pointed to the bottom of the pool, and then at that point, you can put tension into your hand and your forearm. And that's what I call that big dog. That's when you're petting a big dog. Oh, good boy, big dog, right? It's like that kind of tension. And then you start from slow, and then you go from slow to fast out the back. And so if you think about the stroke as a 360, like 220 degrees of the stroke itself is actually that no tension recovery. So just one more thing to focus on swimming, of course, but it just is that tension in the recovery arm.
I love this. And it's very relevant because you have a nice big dog and nice warm kitties. So you can practice even when you're not in the pool of taking that stroke. So get your pick of the week, get 3 nice warm kitties and 1 big dog, and then pet them and you'll be ready to swim.
Exactly. And then I put it in training pieces to swim.
I think that's another way for me to get less swimming in. What if I just do 1 swim a week and then 1 session of petting the kitties and petting the dog?
Yes, exactly. Exactly right. So there you go. Perfect. Oh, I did have, okay. And I had one, actually, I'm sorry. I have one more point, which is that I was talking to an athlete this week who was training for Ironman, and she just had another bike fit done because it turns out that her feet were going numb like after like 45 minutes, 50 minutes regularly on the bike. I thought, oh my gosh, like, why didn't you say something? So basically, here's my point is like, if you are on either road bike or TT bike and your hands regularly go numb and your feet go numb, like there is something wrong with your fit. So either you haven't had a fit, get a fit, or if you had a fit, if it's aero, it doesn't matter, because if you're going numb, then go get it refit. Like there's something wrong. And so just here's permission to like say, okay, hold on, time out. Maybe I got fit by somebody who's really good bike fitter, but the point is it doesn't fit you well. And so we'd much rather have you comfortable and not be numb in your hands or your feet. That's not normal, and it's not sustainable, and it's not healthy.
Totally agree. Yeah, I've gotten a couple rounds of bike fitting done, and the first time I went for like super aggressive aero and it just wasn't comfortable. So I was sitting up the whole time, which is actually not that aero. So you need to find the right level of aero where you can actually stay comfortably in aero. And yes, that might take a couple times to get there, unfortunately.
Yep. Okay. So have we even talked about our main topic today?
I don't even know what this episode is about. I'm just thinking about the Cohasset Tri, honestly. but actually, no, this is a good episode. We are actually going to talk about our very favorite workouts. So we've never really done this before. I think we've alluded to different types of workouts or season planning, but we wanted to basically do a deep dive on what the staples of the Endurance Drive workouts are. And you'll notice that we're going to be kind of riffing on some of the same themes, but this will be relevant for our athletes, you know, kind of why we're programming, what the intention is. But it might also be relevant for folks who are programming for themselves to think about what principles to be including in their training plans and what we found to be really, really effective, especially for 70.3 and Ironman prep.
And we're going to start this off by saying that there's a caveat, like there is no secret magic workouts, you know, regardless of what you see sometimes in the press or this pro did this workout, and that's what got them ready. And they won Kona because of this one workout. And it's like, no, that's just all this noise. But we do want to give you some workouts that we find are fun to do, and hopefully they'll give you a little extra bump in fitness. And, and again, part of your athletic journey is just like appropriate workouts over months and years that fit your athletic profile and address your capacities. So, if you use some of these, pay attention to which ones you like. And if you like them, then maybe saying something to you, saying like, oh, I actually need this, or this is addressing a capacity that I don't have. But, the only secret workout is consistency with intention, month after month, year after year.
100%. And doing it with some level of 80-20 is kind of how we want to think about it. But we'll talk a little bit less today about intensity and more about the actual mechanics of what you're doing. And we talked about swimming twice already on this podcast. I think the first section that we're going to go through is swim workouts. And again, I actually like a lot of these because they make swimming more bearable, these principles that we've thrown in. And I would say I like our swim workouts better than some of the other swim workouts I've seen out there. But Jim, do you want to take the first one of the standard thing that we include in pretty much every swim workout that our athletes do?
Sure. This one's just paddles and buoy. And really what this is just at the end of your main set, we usually have sort of a strength set, which is, for us, it's a standard, 4x200 paddles and buoy at an easy pace. But this builds strength, this builds endurance, and you just get kind of a quick, just 800 at the end of your swim. Or this can be maybe, if you're just starting off, could be 4x100 or 4x300 if you're more of an experienced athlete. And one thing I do want to stress about when we talk about all these workouts, the principle that I use is that if you find a good workout that you like, then make variations of that workout. So again, this is 4x200, but maybe you go 4x300, 4x150. But anyway, we just love that 4x200 paddles and buoy.
Yeah, and paddles and buoy is awesome because it really forces you to have good body position. So when you have the pull buoy, your hips are not going to be sinking. And also, I've seen this a lot. A lot of people will kick when they have a pull buoy, and you don't want to be kicking. You actually just want to keep your legs together, your big toes pointed, and your feet kind of turned in a little bit. And there you can really just focus on roll to reach, roll to pull, excellent body position. And we find then that when you take away the paddles and the buoy, often you can hold some of those same technique fixes. And I also find that having that extra added buoyancy and the pull from the paddles is pretty close to how it feels to swim in a wetsuit. It's not exactly the same, but the wetsuit swimming gives you so much buoyancy that getting a little bit of extra boost is, a way to kind of do that in the pool.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, right? It does feel a lot like wetsuit swimming. And so I think some people sometimes think, I'm doing paddles and buoy. Am I cheating? I'm like, no, you're not cheating. You're recreating what it's going to feel like to swim in that wetsuit. And always keeping in mind that we are open water swimmers. And most of the time we're open water swimming, we're going to be in a wetsuit.
Next one, kind of related to this, Tech 50s, another favorite workout of ours. And we've talked about these actually a lot before, but really all we are focusing on here is a strict technical focus. So it's really, really mindful swimming. You're just going out. And often I find it's helpful to focus on just one element of your stroke per 50. So it might be, hey, I'm going to really work on that pet the worms off kitty, or I'm going to work on the big dog pull, or I'm going to work on like a really light flutter kick, that ankle mobility, things like that. But it's nice because if you're kind of moving through the different mindset things or the different focuses that you have, eventually that will just become a natural part of your stroke. And the reason we do it with 50s is because often your stroke can kind of fall apart. If you really try to focus on it, still you're going to get tired. So if you're going to say, I'm going to swim 200s, by the third 50 of that 200, often you're looking a little bit wonky. But if you just take a second to reset in between these 50s, 5 to 10 seconds of rest, you can maintain really good form for a super, super long time without having it be a really hard aerobic stimulus.
Yeah, I think we found that the 50s are sounding that perfect distance because as you do make improvements, there is enough of yards that you will see an improvement in your time. Maybe it's just a second, but a second's kind of a big deal in the 50. And then the other thing to bear in mind is that when you're doing technical 50s, you actually are working on your fitness as well. And we're not specifically working on fitness, we're working on technique, but fitness is following along behind it. So these are super sneaky because Katie, you and I have done this. We've spent time, maybe like a month or two just working on 50s after 50s at 50s. And if you were to see, just sort of look at us and not know what we were doing and say, why do these people always they're triathletes, are always doing 50s. What are they doing over there? Like, don't they know they have to swim like 2,000 yards or whatever, or 4,000 yards? It's like, yes, we know that. But what happens is when you can repeat your stroke again and again and again and again, you can then go from those technical 50s and then just jump up to just swimming 1,000 and swimming it quite well. So it's not linear like, now I got to go to 100s and 200s. It's not a linear thing. It's an exponential curve. When you hit that pivot point and you've locked in that technique, you can then swim any distance, and because you have the fitness and you have the technique.
And I would say actually one way that you can bridge this maybe to the next level. So I've done a lot of technical 50s. Now my Monday tech swim that I've talked about a lot, I do usually do 100s. But I feel like that's a sweet spot where I can maintain that good form. I often do it with a lot of gear. I'll have, paddles on. I might throw some fins on, something like that. But in general, just repeatable short sets. I'm never going to go out and do technique that sets at 500. That's just not the way that we approach technique.
Yep. Our next one here is it's sort of following the same lines. It's like snorkel only tech set. So again, you could do the tech 50s with snorkel, but I love the snorkel because it can really watch where your hand enters the water and how it pulls through. And I think one of the biggest challenges that especially most beginner, but almost even a lot of advanced triathletes have is like you want to enter the water in line with your shoulder and then pull back in line with your shoulder. And it's hard to see that sometimes when you're trying to roll to breathe and you're kind of worried about, okay, where's my next breath coming from? And am I breathing out? So grab a snorkel. Snorkel takes a little bit of time to get used to. If you're new to snorkel, then I'd recommend getting a nose clip to start with. But anyway, you can use a snorkel and then you can sort of tilt your chin up a little bit and then you can sit there and just watch your hand enter the water. Okay, where is it entering the water? And then making sure that hand doesn't move horizontal. That's a really big one. So people enter in line with their shoulder, but then they pull out towards the left or right. And so enter in line with your shoulder, hold that hand in that position as the fingertips drift to the bottom of the pool and then pull back in line with your shoulder. And if the shoulder doesn't work for you, often you can use the black line at the bottom of the pool. That is generally about shoulder width as well. So again, you can enter in on the edge of the black line and pull along the black line.
And one thing I'll add here is you can actually stack different types of gear with your snorkel. So for example, if you really just want to work on your catch, then throw on a pull buoy so you don't have to think about kicking and just do pull buoy and snorkel. Or if, for example, you want to throw on fins, that's going to make you move a little bit faster through the water and get a really powerful kick going. And you can just isolate what you're focusing on. So think about the intention of the swim workout. And we would say, as your coaches, send us videos or work with a specific swim coach who can tell you what your limiters are. But from there, isolate them. And snorkel is a great way to do that.
And similarly, I just want to encourage people, like if you're going on vacation, I've personally had some of my favorite and best swims like in really small hotel pools. And why is because it's just forced me to not think about yards and pace, I'm a triathlete, going to get in and get my 3,000 in. But just getting in the hotel pool and just balancing and doing, for example, like a lot of sculling, for example, right? Or just like working on, can I actually just lay here and be balanced in the water? And the same thing being on vacation in the ocean, like jump in the water a bunch. Again, go out and throw yourself in the waves. I learned how to really pull, one time when I was out in Hawaii, we had the kids on the boogie board and we were going around kind of this big rock outcropping and suddenly the waves got kind of rough. And I was like, I got to really pull to get us back into shore here. And that's when I really learned, okay, wait a minute, I really need to get my back into this whole thing, my lats. Okay, that's my lats. That's what people have been talking about for the pull. And I found it by just putting myself in that situation.
That's super interesting. Yeah. But Jim, what if you're in a hotel pool and it's like 16 and a half yards long and you can't log it on your watch? What are we going to do?
In that case, just stay in the hotel room and watch HBO.
Exactly. Or we would encourage occasionally some no-watch swimming. That can be helpful as well.
What? Who are you? They're going to take away our triathlon podcast licenses if we talk about that.
I know. Yeah, and they're going to take away our swim heart rate strap too, probably.
Exactly.
Last one here's a fun one.
Yeah, what's our last one?
Social open water swimming. We've done this a bunch of times at our local pond up in New Hampshire. It's called Post Pond. And it's great because if you do this square around Post Pond, there's like a dock that you stop at and there's another dock and then there's a rock. And the amount of times we've just gone out with a big crew and like swim a 500 to the first rock, hang out there for 15 minutes, swim another 500, hang out. It's really, really fun. And you still get these longer endurance sets in. But I think we maybe underestimate how big of a bridge it is to go from like swimming technical 50s to swimming 2,000 yards straight with no breaks. And you actually can take breaks. So getting to hang out with people is awesome for that. And we'd say also make sure that you have one of those swim buoys because it's really great to just hang onto your buoy. And of course, it's good for safety, but also for being social with the crew. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, so much fun. Great times out there in Post Pond. So, okay, have we reached the bike?
Yeah, thank God we're done with swimming. That was the most time we've ever spent on swimming, and I don't want it to happen again.
That's it. We're making a pledge right now to our listeners. We want to talk about swimming for the next 5 episodes.
Exactly. All right, first one on the bike, low cadence Zwift climbing. Talk to us about that, Jim.
Oh, yeah. So we talked about low cadence and other podcasts. And for a while, I didn't believe it. Then I believed it. But then we started doing a lot of these low cadence Zwift climbing, especially to get ready for Ironman Lake Placid. And we found these were super effective. So this is just getting in Zwift, getting these really big long climbs, doing like 50 to 65 RPMs at zone 2, zone 3 watts, but with like a zone 2 heart rate, and you just grind up that hill for like 60 or 90 minutes. And that's a great way to build strength and to get ready for some of these beefier half Ironmans or Ironmans.
Yeah, I find that that's really helpful for transitioning into outdoor hilly riding, because generally on the trainer, you're not necessarily prepping for those big hills. So if you can simulate them, that's awesome. And honestly, the Zwift courses are really fun for climbing big mountains. There's these different portals sometimes, and I actually find it pretty entertaining to watch. So I think for me, like on Zwift, I might like that low cadence climbing even more than some of our structured workouts.
For sure. How about the next one here? How about aerobic conditioning, neuro? What do we do there?
Yeah, so those are some spicy workouts. I always tell athletes, like, the spice is coming when I give them these workouts. But we'll do some blocks early in the season where basically you'll have a 20 to 30 minute warm up into a main set that has usually between 20 and 40 seconds, really, really hard, like 125% of your FTP into 20 to 40 seconds at 50%. So like basically no resistance. And we find that that really can push that upper end power, which will help you a lot later in the season. We're doing this more in the general prep phase. And you should find that you are working hard in those intervals, but there's not so many of them that it's like turns into threshold for the entire time. I think often actually we still see like zone 2-ish heart rate overall because there's the corresponding recovery, but it's such a great early season boost. And that's something that you're not going to see during the specific prep phase when we're doing a lot more race pace type stuff. But we can find that we can boost FTP early in the season if we do some of those blocks.
Yeah, absolutely. And this was sort of leads into our next one, which is just we have a zone 2 ride, and then we just do these again at 120 to 125% sprints. And it's not usually as many as sort of the anaerobic capacity ones, but basically, and you can use this in Zwift or use this outside. Just go for a zone 2 ride, and then maybe 4 times go 30 seconds, kind of pretty hard. 125% FTP. It's a pretty beefy pace. Then take 90 seconds to recover at 50% of your FTP, or just some sort of active recovery. Do that 4 times, or maybe do that 8 times on a ride. And it's a nice way to sort of stay within zone 2, but also work some of that speed reserve.
Totally. And if you want to do this in a fun, organic way, you could also look at some short Strava segments outside. So often there's Strava segments that are only, say, 30 seconds or 45 seconds long. And so pushing on those, I love a ride that might be 2 hours at zone 1, 2. But then I even just push for like 1 or 2 crowns. And then you just do that little, it's a lot of fun and it keeps things exciting. And of course, it's always exciting to get a crown. So keep that in mind. And actually, one thing I'll add here is, it's a little bit of a plug for the Endurance Drive, but we talk about all these structured Zwift workouts. And if you are coached by us, you do have access to this incredible library that Jim has built of all of the custom workouts that we recommend. So you basically just like pop in Zwift, you click your workout and you go. That's been really, really amazing for all of our athletes, I think, to work off of. So just something to be aware of. We also have a sampler that you can download on our website. So quick plug for the Endurance Drive.
And our last one here, you're going to sense a theme, everybody, for these, but the weekend coffee ride. So again, assemble your crew, ride social and easy, ride long. And it just turns out these end up being sort of key foundational workouts. And more importantly, they actually don't feel like a workout.
Yeah, I love these. And I think that's where we've built a lot of our big aerobic fitness. And if you're riding somewhere that has hills, or you're riding just with group dynamics where sometimes things are going faster and sometimes things are going easier, you will actually hit some organic intervals. So I think it's really easy to fall into the trap of like, well, I have my workout, it's 6 by 15 minutes at half Ironman pace and it has to be exactly perfect. Like, yes, it's great to try to nail things the way that you want to during your race sims, but just for standard weekend rides, I think go out with a group, go out and have fun, and you're still going to build some really incredible fitness doing that.
Absolutely. Which brings us to the run. Ooh, and our first one here is one of our fun ones, which is we call Hills and Fast. Katie, tell us what that's all about.
I love Hills and Fast. This is one of my favorite speed workouts ever. And we often give this to people before we might take them through like a track progression or a tempo progression. It's sort of your introduction into speed in the beginning of the season, but it builds absolutely massive fitness. So the way that these workouts work is there's lots of different levels, but the very first level is you do 10 by 30 seconds uphill fast after warming up for a couple miles. It's usually like a 90% effort and then jog back down. And then after you've done all those, you do about 5 minutes at your threshold pace on flat ground. So you're working that uphill kind of sprint effort. It's not exactly a sprint, just underneath that, but a hard effort uphill. And then you're also working on that flat speed. And that's sort of just trying to help people make the connection that hill running makes you faster on flats, because it does. And then it's a little bit of a different feel on the body. You had to go hard uphill versus flat. But we find that people will often be really blown away by how fast they can go for that 5 minute threshold after they really prime their system with the 30 seconds uphill. And then there's a ton of variations. You can move into 2 by 4 minutes at threshold, 3 by 4 minutes at threshold, add another 5 by 30 second hills. We'll take people all the way through the progression. And before you know it, they're doing like 20 hills and they're doing a bunch of time at threshold and they're really strong and feeling good with it. So yeah, we love these workouts.
Yeah, anybody knows us and is our program knows that we love hills. Hills are speed work in disguise. And I think particularly for triathletes, we're always just trying to manage overall load. So yeah, it's fun to go to the track and it's fun to run around with your friends fast, but there can be some downside of that as well, or at least some liability. So we always prefer to do a lot of hills because it's just a way to really globally engage all of your muscles and to build strength, and you're building tons of speed. And like you said, Katie, it's super fun to run hills and feel kind of slow and then get on that 5-minute threshold pace and like, oh my gosh, this feels kind of easier. Like, I didn't know I could run this fast or this easy at a threshold pace.
And one thing to keep in mind for this workout is you do want to pick a route that has access to both a hill and a flat. So we have the Norwich track, we call it, which is just like there's a hilly road and then there's a flat road, but just do a little bit of scouting to find that, because in a lot of places that might actually be a little bit harder to find. In cities that don't have a lot of hills, sometimes you might look at bridges, can be a good option to simulate those. Or there's ways to simulate this on the treadmill, but I do think your best bet is being outside in an area that has a hill and has a flat road as well.
This next one here, we call the 10-second max speed. And this is an interesting one because talk about minimum effective dose. This might be the ultimate minimum effective dose. So if you take anything away from this podcast, use this one. So basically it's like 20 or 30 seconds, easy warm up. And then what you want to try to do is hopefully find like a slight uphill that you can run for a couple minutes. And then what you're going to do is you're going to do 6 by 10 seconds at max sprint or intent with a 10-second recovery. So it's a very short recovery. And for the max sprint, I would say count how many times you strike your right leg during the 10 seconds. So you know, like, oh, I'm striking 15 times or 17 times. And then, that's at about 10 seconds. Then you have a 10-second recovery. And then you do it again. So it's 6 by 10 seconds at max. And again, a total of 2 minutes. But I guarantee you this will make you a faster runner and you will feel pretty wiped out at the end of it.
Yeah, these are just such a different kind of nervous system stimulus than what we're usually doing. Really asking yourself to go all out. It's very rare that we do that. And this is also something that you have to be really, really warmed up in order to do. So if, for example, you didn't really have time to do a long warm up, I wouldn't say to shorten this and just like only do the max sprints. This is really like you need to be warm and loose and be careful doing this when it's super, super cold out. But if you can execute it right, I find that this is one of the most economical ways and quick ways to really build some super strong power.
Yep. Our next one here, we stole this one from the Norwegians. It's Norwegian sub-max runs. And what these are basically sort of a light tempo, right? So basically an example is 4 by 3 minutes that we call sub-threshold pace, or really sort of your marathon pace, or you can do it your threshold pace plus 30 seconds. So 4 by 3 minutes with a 1 walk recovery in between them, and then move that into at the end of 4 by, say, 1 minute 5K pace with a 1 minute walk recovery.
Yeah, and these are fun. There's actually a lot to remember with these workouts, and I was skeptical the first time that I did them, but we did them a lot in the Placid build, and I found that they were super awesome for getting us to be faster runners. Tempo running is really, really awesome. Again, we usually say like avoid that gray zone, but when you're doing it in a targeted, specific way that has a real goal, which is basically to move up your LT2, which is where you're switching over to the carb burning zone, then it can be really effective. So huge fan of the Norwegian training, and obviously it's worked for them, so I think it can work for all of us too.
And I think we find, again, sort of managing overall load, especially with running with triathletes, like with this, that marathon pace tends to be like a really nice pace where you're getting a stimulus, you're getting some speed, but you're not overcooking it and sort of jeopardizing the day or the next few days.
Totally. Yeah. Last one here, again, riffing on the theme of community, we would say something really fun to do for the run is go to some group track workouts. Most towns and cities have these type of things. And it's just great to join a group and go and run fast with your friends. We find that you can often push maybe harder than you would by yourself. And honestly, it's really kind of demoralizing to go to the track by yourself. I find that harder than just going for a zone 2 run by yourself. But if you show up and the workout is happening, like we as coaches can figure out how to adapt the rest of your training peaks. We would just say, go check it out, meet some friends, like-minded people who like to do hard things. So that's a huge recommendation from us. All right, so those are just a subset of the workouts that we love. We love a lot of workouts. I think something that we didn't really talk about here, but that is a huge staple, is just like zone 2 stuff, zone 2 riding, zone 2 running, zone 2 swimming. That is really a huge staple. So I think that actually comprises probably 80% of our workout library. And we've told you about the 20% that gives us some different spice. But this is just kind of a sampling of the things that can get you prepared for your 70.3 or your Ironman in terms of the nitty gritty. And yeah, we're always open to learning. This library has been built over time and we're always adding new stuff to it. So love to hear from our listeners. If there's any workouts that you think are super, super effective for your goals, we're always happy to add them and try them out. And I think you and I, Jim, are pretty good at being guinea pigs before we give our workouts to people. So where as soon as you're operational again, and I'm mostly operational except emotionally from the Cohasset Triathlon, we will be trying the new workouts.
Exactly right. Yeah, what is the recommended recovery time for Cohasset? Is it like 6 weeks or 8 weeks? What's the
6 weeks of therapy and then
okay?
Just kidding. No, I'm totally good. I think honestly, I raced less than 48 hours ago when we're recording this. This episode will air actually next week, but I think I'm going to be back into my full enthusiastic outlook on triathlon and all endurance sports for the rest of my life, probably as soon as possible.
So you're not selling your TT bike quite yet, is that what you're saying?
Not yet. No, but I am going to sell my wetsuit.
Okay, good. Excellent. Yeah, right. It's dangerous out there. Yeah, don't do it.
Awesome. Okay, we've got a couple of listener questions. Do you want to take the first one?
Sure. The first one comes from John. So he said the goal is to try to keep your heart rate as low as you can and push as hard as you can. So with caffeine, it naturally increases your heart rate. How do you balance that? I noticed after my coffee breaks on the bike, my heart rate is about 10 beats higher for a while. Katie, what's your recommendation on this one?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I think that in general, we know that caffeine is a little bit of a performance enhancer, which can be helpful. And I would say if you're feeling super, super low energy, sometimes the first thing that you need to do is, number one, get some carbs, and number two, get some caffeine going. And even if that means your heart rate's going to go up a little bit, I do think that's okay. That's especially true in a racing context. But I would say if you're someone who really struggles, especially with like morning runs where your heart rate just jacks up immediately, you could experiment with not having as much caffeine beforehand or just timing your caffeine differently and seeing if that kind of has an impact on the heart rate stuff. I think at the end of the day, it's going to be sort of like a case by case on what's going to be the most effective here. But I wouldn't overuse caffeine. And I think bringing it out only at times when you feel like the energy is lagging might be helpful. And I think one thing to add to that is often if you're stopping for coffee, you might also be getting like a coffee cake or like a muffin or something. And that's a big hit of sugar, which again, sometimes can just make you feel a little bit jittery. So I do think like the sugar and the caffeine hitting your bloodstream at the same time probably is going to have some type of impact there. And the bottom line is like that is okay, especially if it's giving you energy to keep going. Just don't let it stay there the whole rest of the ride. Like let it rise for a little bit. And then if you can bring it back down soon, that's helpful.
Yeah.
I think a follow-up question that people have asked me a lot recently is, do we have recommendations for a specific racing caffeine strategy on the bike and run? Jim, do you advise your athletes on that?
I don't really, I generally tell people like, especially in this longer stuff, like on the run, it's by any means necessary. So I think by the time people get to the run, especially for an Ironman, like caffeine maybe could help, but I think a lot of times people have bigger issues like dehydration and they're just low on carbs. So I think, getting back to what you just saying, like, focus on good nutrition, getting in some water. You're definitely going to be dehydrated for sure. We're all racing in hot stuff here. You're going to be probably still low on carbs, even though if you hit your plan perfectly on the bike, you're still low on sugar. So sugar, water, and I don't know, I've never been in a race where I feel like caffeine should be like a major piece of it. But then again, I've never done like a full overnight race. So maybe that's where that would come into play. But anyway, do you use caffeine specifically in any of your racing strategies?
Yeah, I think I similarly don't build this into my strategy very much. I think sometimes I'll like have a random gel that happens to have caffeine in it. And as everyone knows, my go-to on the run for an Ironman is always going to be a ton of Coke. So I'm actually taking in a lot of caffeine doing that. But I think often feeling low energy at the end of a long race is usually more of a fuel thing and a carb thing than it is a caffeine thing. So it's not like, oh, if I just take a caffeine pill while I'm bonking, I'm going to feel better. Like that's probably a recipe for a huge disaster. So again, like if your carbs have some caffeine in them, that's fine. I have advised people before, like, okay, if you're taking gels, maybe you alternate. Maybe you do a regular gel and then you do a caffeine gel back and forth just to have some rhyme or reason to it. And the last thing you really need to be thinking about during an Ironman, for example, is how you're going to feel after. But I would say if you take like 600 milligrams of caffeine during your Ironman run, you are not going to sleep for multiple days. So you might want to just be thinking a little bit about that, because I don't think it's going to enhance performance so much that it would make the difference between like finishing and not, or having a good day and not. Yeah.
I mean, at that point, especially during Ironman, like you have got such fatigue in your peripheral and your central nervous system that there's probably no amount of caffeine that's actually going to combat that hit on your nervous system.
Totally. Yeah. So that's our thoughts. We are always, of course, open to learn about how other people use caffeine, whether it's effective or not. But this is also something that's really, really individual dependent. And biggest point is don't try anything brand new on race day. So if you think caffeine is really helpful for you, practice it in your race sim, and then you'll have an idea of how it feels.
Maybe you didn't have enough caffeine at the Cohasset Tri. Maybe that's what happened there.
I had no fuel. I had one sip of my electrolytes, maybe.
You had no caffeine strategy for the Cohasset Tri. I think I've pinpointed it right there.
That's what it is. Yeah. All right. I'm putting that in my post-race notes for sure.
I want you to journal that, please.
Definitely. That's actually jumping ahead to my challenge of the week. But before we get there, we have one more listener question note that you dropped in here, Jim.
Sure. So last week we talked a little bit about like people are asking about these graphene cooling headbands. And I think we sort of poo-pooed them. And I listened to a podcast this week. I regularly listen to Jason Koopcast. It's mostly around ultra runners, but here at the Endurance Drive, we do ultra running as well. And I have often thought that I learn a ton about triathlon by actually listening to what ultra runners do, because I think they're on the forefront of a lot of things like cooling and nutrition and that type of thing. And again, sort of the demands of a lot of ultra runs are sort of the same demands of like half Ironman and Ironman. So anyway, Jason Koop had a heat specialist on there. I've dropped a link in there, a podcast link. It's an excellent listen for anybody racing in the heat. They talk about all kinds of cooling strategies and things you can do. And at one point during that conversation, they talk about these graphene headbands. And basically the bottom line is that, like anything, if you see a product and they claim it does this and that, first thing is dig into the science. Is there actual real science behind it? And I think especially with the graphene headband, sort of one of the takeaways is that when you're cooling something, you need to cool like big parts of your body, like your chest or your back or your whole head. And if you look at sort of these graphene headbands, like your forehead is not a very big area. And so you're definitely not having probably much of an effect, at least from a core temperature perspective. It may give you like a feeling of coolness. And so there is that. There's sort of two things, like, do you feel cool? Okay, great. Then maybe it does work, but does it really lower your core temperature? Probably not. It's probably too small of an area of your body to actually cool anything down.
Totally. So maybe the take home here is like, just use ice. We know ice works. Ice is awesome. Maybe stick to that unless you want to drop several $100s on this thing.
Yes, there's a ton of little tips in here about how to use ice and where people use ice in this podcast. So it's an excellent listen. Check it out.
Awesome. All right. Well, challenge of the week. You already basically gave away what mine was, but I would say it's useful to spend 10 or 15 minutes journaling after a race or even a race sim. It can be really helpful. I find especially if you struggle with that like negative self-talk, writing it all down can help you get some perspective. Forcing yourself to look at the pros can be really, really helpful. And I've been joking a lot about this race. I actually feel really fine about it. It was just a silly thing and a lot of stress, but journaling really helped me. So would recommend that others do that as well.
Awesome. Sorry, I didn't mean to reveal your challenge of the week. Do you want to reveal my challenge of the week? You can go for it. You take mine.
It's fine. No, it's fine. You can have your moment, your double moment, Jim.
Okay. All right. Woohoo. Okay. So my challenge of the week is to plan to volunteer at a race, mostly after your race season over. Maybe you just do it, during your race season. But at some point, just think about trying to give back to these races. I think these races are really run on volunteers. Like, these races do not happen without volunteers, and these people who just get up on those Saturday mornings or Sunday mornings and just sit there and hand out water, and it can be a real thankless job. And so we just encourage everybody, like, get involved just to some way, shape, or form. Like, maybe not to the extent that Katie gets involved, like Cohasset Tri, she has to plan the party and all that kind of stuff, but just some sort of volunteer.
Definitely. And actually, one thing I'll add to that is if you are Ironman curious and you're listening to this podcast, then volunteer at an Ironman. Jim, you had me do that the year before I did Ironman Lake Placid for the first time with our friend Matthew, who also did it. And that was quite eye-opening. Like, you have to see people going through what it's like to do Ironman to really make sure it's a hell yes for you. And it's often not pretty. So I would encourage people to do that. If they're curious about signing up for an Ironman, volunteer at one first.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think one of the things we talked a lot about with Ironman athletes, I keep saying, like, on the run, like, it's such a slow thing. Like, you're going to see these people just shuffling along. And you see the people who have never been to an Ironman, they look at you and they go, well, what do you mean? I'm going to be running like my 9-minute pace. Like, no, you're going to be shuffling, like, along with like the whole group of people. Like, you're going to see hundreds of people shuffling out there, surviving, and people just don't get it because they haven't seen it yet. So I love that idea of, like, yeah, go volunteer for an Ironman, and you'll really get a good sense of, like, what is this game all about? And it'll really open your eyes.
And build up your tolerance to seeing a lot of bodily fluids all over the course. That's another part of it. All right, last segment here, gear pick of the week, our very favorite. I'm going to recommend a bike jersey. So Velocio, which is a brand that we like, makes a merino wool jersey. It's awesome because it's like super, super light. You can wear it in the summer, but I find that it's amazing for cooling and wicking. So if you're going out on a really humid day, hot day, grab this merino wool jersey. Really good quality, and it feels super light on the skin. So highly recommend. They have men's and women's. Yep,
I have a men's one. I love this one. I think I don't like it's a dark purple, so I don't use it on the road, but I've been using it sort of fat biking on the trails, and perfect. Okay, my gear pick week is Koya, which is our favorite recovery drink, and you may have seen it in the supermarket, although you have to sort of search for it because it can be like an end cap, or it's in the produce area, or maybe it's in the dairy area. So you kind of hunt these things out or ask around for them. But Koya, check it out.
I love Koya so much. You turned me onto them, Jim. And 2 interesting insights for me. Number 1, Starbucks has started carrying Koya now in their case of things near the coffee. So for me, like post-run, if I need a protein shake, I'll run into the nearest Starbucks and I'll get a Koya there.
Awesome. Go Starbucks. Yeah. Right on.
Yeah. And my second insight on Koya is they have new flavors now. And one of them tastes like Cocoa Puffs and one of them tastes like Fruity Pebbles. And there's like a Cinnamon Toast Crunch one. It's the best thing I've ever consumed in my entire life. Highly, highly recommend.
They are so good, but you have to usually live near like a Whole Foods to get those things. So they usually, yes.
Those are the bougie ones. They have not yet made it to the Upper Valley.
No, they don't. We're still the very bit of vanilla flavors, but yes, I've had those too. And my head explodes when I go to a Whole Foods just in general, and I see the Koyas and I go, oh my gosh, and I just start, I feel like kind of like a freak. I'm just like putting all these Koyas in my thing. I'm like, I'm only staying here in the city for 2 nights, but I've got like 10 Koyas, like, so then it sort of becomes a job. Like, all right, how many of these can I drink per day?
Mm-hmm. They are absolutely the best. So yeah, love our Koyas, and yeah, they're truly the best recovery drink. So great recommendation, great episode. Thank you to our listeners. As always, we will link our podcast feedback and questions form in the show notes, and we will see you here again next week. But thanks so much for listening. And yeah, our listeners are the best.
All right, they are. Thanks a lot. See you later, peeps.